Hi, everybody. All right, so today we're going to talk about the afterlife. And the first, probably most difficult part of this particular section of the class is disabusing people of things they think they know. Start with this. There's two pictures of the afterlife in Western culture. And people have smushed them together so much that I think they think they're one thing, but they're not. And in fact, they probably can't be put together. One picture of the afterlife is the soul picture. The idea that you, the real you, are not your body, so that when your body dies, it's sensible to say you didn't die because you weren't that body. You are some other thing, a soul. This has its origin in Plato. It's not a Christian notion. It's not a Judeo-Christian notion. It's not Jewish either. It's not Islamic. It's Platonic. Plato believed that you are your mind. Your psyche was his word for it. And I think he meant by psyche, your mind. That mind, as he conceived of it, is something that has the qualities that over time we attach to this other word, soul. It's immaterial, it's eternal, he thought, strangely unchanging, and it survives your death. That's our story for today, is Plato's conception of the soul, his arguments for it, his arguments for its nature, and what it has to do with death and life after death. And then there's another story, resurrection. Most people think of those two things as related. If you believe in Western culture in the afterlife, you probably believe you're a soul, you're not your body, and you probably believe that you resurrect from the dead. Those can't both be true. If you're a soul, you don't die. Your body dies, but you are not your body. Your body is pollution. Your body's drags you down into this mortal world. It was never you. Resurrection says that you are your body. You're not this immaterial ghost in the machine. You're not a soul. You are your body. And if you're going to survive your death, your body must be raised from the dead. That's what resurrection is. It's not reincarnation, by the way. That's a different thing. That's from the other side of the world. And in Western culture, you have resurrection of the dead, which is a Christian notion, started in the 1st century AD, and Platonist souls, which started 400 years earlier in the 4th century BC. Both of them have their origins before those two times, but they're opposed views. You either are your body, in which case it makes more sense to believe in resurrection, because your body must rise again for you to live again, or you're not your body, you're this soul, in which case it makes no sense to resurrect your body. That's not you. You are your mind, and your mind will go to a heaven of minds. We will talk about resurrection of the dead next class. So I'll save most of what there is to say about that for that day. There's a lot of questions to ask about resurrection, what its nature is, how we know it's not about souls. Let me point you to just a Bible book. If you want a couple of Bible books, if you want to read up on the nature of resurrection, you look at the last couple of chapters of every one of the Gospels. It will describe resurrection to you. I'll point you, for the most descriptive one, you go to Luke. The last chapter of Luke is Luke 24. Jesus has risen from the dead, and he is speaking to his disciples. And they don't say that much. What they do say is about what happened, what he is. So he is risen from the dead, and his disciples look startled. Go towards the end of chapter 24. He appears before the disciples and they're startled. They think they see a ghost. And he says, I am not a ghost. Touch me. Touch my body. It is me, he says. I am not a ghost. And then he does a strange thing. He eats a piece of fish in front of them. Why? Why? Because the author of that book wanted you to know that it was the real him, and real means embodied. He was hungry. His body was hungry. Jesus' body was hungry. He rose from the dead, and he is his body. Now that fits, it's not just one chapter in one book. It fits a long story that starts in Genesis and goes all the way through the Bible, where you are your body. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's you. Those words are a description of your nature. You are ashes and dust. You're not a ghost. In fact, it was blasphemous and pagan for the Christians to believe that you were a soul until much later, when they'd forgotten their origins. There was an ancient tradition, though, that did think that you were a disembodied ghost in the machine. You were a soul. That was Platonism. Okay? So Plato, back to Greece in the 4th century. Plato didn't invent the notion of the soul. People have probably always believed in something like souls, but he is the touchstone in literature and philosophy and religion for that idea in Western culture. He developed it, he argued for it, he explained it, and not in one place, in a string of places. He seems to have inherited this idea from the Pythagoreans, that group of mathematician philosophers who gave us the Pythagorean theorem. They didn't really, it's like older than that. But he studied with these Pythagoreans. Pythagoreans believed in reincarnation and the soul. Plato came away from them believing in it too. And unlike the Pythagoreans, he wrote it all down. So that's our origin story for souls, Plato. There are lots of things to say about the psyche, the soul, in Plato. And they come in pieces. In Alcibiades, you have a clip of the Alcibiades. The basic argument is that you use your body like a hand might use a hammer, or a person might use a wheel. When something uses something else, when A uses B, A and B must be different things. Argument one. I don't know how good that argument is. You play with that, but just to say it again, when one thing uses another, they must not be the same. They must be divisible if A uses B. Now you may use your hand, so you are not your hand. You may use your arm, so you are not your arm. You could use your head, so you are not your head. You can use your whole body, you are not your body. That's the Alcibiades argument. Fast forward a little bit later, and you have a much more famous piece of writing called the Phaedo. You have that in your book as well. The Phaedo it pretends to be Socrates' death scene. Socrates has been tried and convicted of worshiping false gods and corrupting the youth, and he is sentenced to die. The Phaedo is his death scene. His friends come in crying and trying to console him, and he tries to calm them down by telling them he's not worried about death, because he doesn't believe that death is the end of him. And he spends a long dialogue, explaining what he thinks he really is. Probably Socrates didn't believe any of this. This is all Plato putting words in the mouth of Socrates and using Socrates as a vehicle for his own views. This is Plato's view now, but expressed through the mouth of Socrates dying. Okay? There are several arguments in the Phaedo, and I'm not going to get bogged down in them because your book really focuses on one. that I'm going to focus on as well. But let me knock out a couple of the other ones. Plato believes that things come to be from their opposites. Being comes from non-being, basically. Something comes to be from what it was not. So life comes from death, and thus he thinks death comes from life, and life comes from death, and death comes from life. This cycle of one thing coming from the other is a launching point for Plato's belief in reincarnation. You die, which is death coming from life, and thus, if that cycle of opposites continues, you can expect life to come from death. Again, make of that argument what you will, but it's in there. It's in the Phaedo. He thought it was true. Plato thinks you have knowledge of things you haven't observed. Here, we get deeper into Platonism, really. When we call someone a Platonist, we mean that they believe in ideas. What does that mean? You can see good things with your eyes, but you have never seen the good with your eyes. The good is not an object, it's an idea. What is an idea? Is it just words? It could just be words. That's nominalism about ideas. If you believe those ideas are real things, like the good is not just a word, it's a name of a concept. It's not any of the things you've seen. You may see a good thing over here, a good painting, a good piece of, pizza, a good person. All of those things will die. All of those things will disappear. Goodness does not disappear. It's not an object. It can't die. It can't change. Ideas are different than things. When you come to know about ideas by looking at things. You look at this circle and this circular thing, a pizza and a wheel, and you think, those are the same somehow. What makes them the same? What thing do they have in common? They have an idea in common. So ideas. Plato thinks our minds have access to these things and they're interesting. That's what philosophy is about. It's about them. Coming to understand their nature, coming to understand their definitions, thinking about them individually. When you do that, you're doing philosophy. But Plato takes a step back and asks us what they actually are. What they are, for Plato, are eternal forms. They're not things, they're the shapes of things. And while things may come and go, those shapes, those forms, those geometric ways things can be, are eternal. Okay, so you get to the passage that your book clips, and it asks you whether you believe in things like the good and beauty. And you do. You say, I do believe in beauty. I think that she's beautiful and this piece of music is beautiful. And I believe there's something they have in common. They have beauty in common. And then you ask yourself whether you have ever beheld that thing with your eyes. You may see the beautiful girl and hear the beautiful piece of music, but beauty itself, you haven't seen that. It's not physical. You can't touch it with your body. How do you behold it? You behold it with your mind. Plato's got a dualism that is driving the argument here. You have two parts, a body and a mind. The world also has two parts. It's got physical things. The girl and the piece of music are physical things. And then non-physical things they seem to share, like beauty and goodness and even geometry, right? They have shapes they have in common. That immaterial stuff you don't see, you think about. And the part of you that is doing the thinking is like the things it knows. What are ideas like? Well, they don't change. The circle never changes. The piece of pizza disappears, but the circle is always pi r squared, right? Um, this beautiful thing disappears, but beauty itself is always there, and it doesn't change. Good things disappear, goodness itself doesn't change. The part of you that knows those things is like the things it knows. If they're eternal, you're eternal. If ideas are eternal, so are you. If ideas are divine, he thinks they're divine, they have this kind of quality that's not of this world. The part of you that has access to them, the mind that closes its eyes and thinks about them, is also not of this world. And Plato thinks you can, you come to know this in your own life when you realize that when you really want to know things, when you want to think, you need quiet. You need to go away from the noise and the crowds. If you're taking a math test, something simple like a math test, you take a math test, do you do it better in a crowded, noisy train with people bumping into you? Or do it better in a quiet place where your body is shut off and you can close your eyes and think? Your mind does better when it's away from your body. And that is a hint, he thinks, of what your mind is. It's not your body. It's separate from it. And so when Socrates is sentenced to die, and his friends are hysterical with, sadness that he's gonna die, he's gonna drink hemlock and die. They ask him at the end, how shall we bury you? And he says, quote, any way you like, provided you can catch me. It's kind of meant to be a joke. You can't catch me, because the me is not my body. Do whatever you want with my body, but I will be gone. I will be off wherever souls go. Now, some virtues of this view. It explains identity. It explains, let me put that in scare quotes. It gives you a sense of how to explain identity. Identity over time, like your body changes, but you are the same person. How are you the same when you go through all these changes? Well, what's the same is this soul. How a soul is supposed to be interactive with your body, though, some responses to Plato from the ancient world. I'll give you some from Lucretius. Lucretius was a Roman philosopher in the 1st century. Lucretius had the following things to say. If your soul was really distinct from your body, Lucretius suggests, it shouldn't change so much with your body. So you are born a baby, and then a toddler, and you grow through childhood, and you grow through adulthood. Does your mind change as you come to be from an infant to an adult? It changes radically. It changes enormously. It couldn't change more. Does that change track your body? It does. When your body changes, your mind changes. Lucretius asks, why is it, if your mind is a soul separate from your body, that when you drink wine, it changes your mind? You slows down, you get a little spinny. It'd be hard to explain if your mind was this hovering above your body and had nothing to do with your body. It feels like every time your body changes, your mind changes. You prick your finger and you feel something in your mind. You hear a loud noise, you hear something in your mind. You can't really do what Plato suggests and separate your mind from your body. You can close your eyes, but you're not going anywhere. That's sort of the dichotomy of the ancient world. How separate from you are you? How separate from your body are you really? It gives you a way of explaining how to survive death. Death happens to your body. You are not that thing, so you survive your death. But it does so at a conception, with a conception of the self that may or may not actually be true. It'd help if it were true that you are not your body. If you suspect you and this body, this fleshly stuff you're stuck in, if you like it, it's not that bad, I like flesh. Maybe you are that. You're not trapped in it like a prison. Maybe that's you. If you're drawn to that idea, then the other conception of the afterlife in Western culture, resurrection, is built for that. You either are your body or you're not. Can't be both. You know, it could be that you are some hybrid of mind and body. There's a name for that. We'll talk about that next week. But on a fundamental level, either you are or you are not your body. It's either essential to you or it's not. It either is you or it's not. And that's the first question to ask. And that's why we do Plato here first. Plato is our Western touchstone for the idea that your body is not you. So I'm going to put the discussion board up in a few minutes here. And I want you to really think about that question. How important is your body to you? Is it really just garbage that should be discarded when you move on from this world? Or is it really you and it should go to heaven with you? Not with you, as you. Which is it? So, we'll start with that. We'll take off from there next week with resurrection. And I hope you guys are doing well. I'll talk to you soon.